Aloha everybody and welcome to Facing Our Future. I'm your host Angus McKelvey, and as always we go ahead and use this as an opportunity to explore the problems, issues, and challenges facing us and how we can define them and make ourselves better as we move towards facing our future. Today we're going to discuss an issue which has been on everybody's minds, a complex situation, which is homelessness in Hawaii. And I'm very glad to be joined by Representative Joe Jordan. Hi, Joe. Welcome for coming.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you being here. And you know, you have worked on this issue both before you were in government, and now that you're in government, you're still heavily involved in this issue. How has this been a big issue in your area in particular and in general?
Oh, in my area?
Yes.
Well, you see, I come from the west side,
like I do, yes.
My compadre here. Yes. So I come from the Waianae Coast. I sat on the neighborhood board about 12 years prior to getting into the legislature. I've been here about 4 years. So we're talking almost 16 years. On the neighborhood board, I was heavily involved with Parks and Rec, but that's on the city level. And probably in the late 90s, we started seeing homeless. And you probably didn't call it homeless back then. It was just people that would camp on the beach.
Camping?
Yeah, kind of a little permanent.
Yes, to the government.
Be mobile, you know?
Yes.
They would move from spot to spot, so they weren't there and stagnant. So those numbers back in the late 90s to about 2002, 2003 had grown from about 300 to 3,000.
Wow.
Just on my coastline alone.
That's amazing.
So I've been involved since then through the previous administration's emergency proclamation for the Waianae Coast, stepped in to office. I continued on with the HIC, which is Hawaii's Interagency Council on Homelessness.
Okay.
Yeah, so in fact, we just had a meeting yesterday. So that just gives you a little bit of background about what I've been doing with homelessness, and it really has grown from, you know, people talking around the table to now having this interagency meaning state, city, federal, the different departments within the state and city, now coming with the providers out there, where we all come to the table, look at commonalities, look at overlays of processes and services, and say, how can we start streamlining better? How can we get better services to those individuals out there? And when we talk about homelessness, we don't even talk about just an individual, like you might see in Waikiki or downtown Honolulu. When you go out to the rural areas, you may see families. I remember the first family that was taken off of a beach park in Nanakuli, 9 children. So it was almost, and they had some extended family members with them, so it was almost 14 individuals. So we're not just talking about one, this was a family. You know, today, the wife now has a job, they're in a home now, and that was almost 10 years ago. So it has really changed what type of homelessness we have, the different issues we have. It's just not only economic anymore, it could be substance, it could be alcoholism, and our number one would be the mental health issues.
Mental health has been the big one.
Correct.
Do you think that the influx of mental health homeless is both an indication of the system of mental health care in Hawaii, or do you think that given some of the rumors that this is part of this phenomenon that you hear about, of homeless being relocated or moved to Hawaii or other places because in the area they're from there are no services available?
Correct. So you'll hear out in the news and people chitter-chatting that, oh, they fly them to here. There has been no proven documents that they fly people to Hawaii because we may have better services or we have better weather. There's stories that that's happened, but we can't prove that.
Nothing
and
beyond anecdotal.
I wouldn't just say that's not a myth. We do have great weather over here, 24/7, sunshine, 365 days a year. I mean, that beats, being in the middle of Chicago in winter, right?
Well, I would also, but then I would be like, wow, last January and February, it wasn't exactly
it wasn't
paradise out.
That's correct. So I wouldn't put it past, and some people come to Hawaii for the American dream, right? It might be a paradise for us, and then realize it's not their American dream because it is too costly to be here. I don't have a job that fits my needs, and start falling down on their luck and just doesn't have the money to get that ticket and go back home.
Yes.
And they may end up on our streets. In fact, back 10 years ago when I was the Park and Rec chair of the Waianae Neighborhood Board, there was an individual that had been homeless for 10 years. So we asked him, what's the story? And he did. He came here for the new life and a job and just fell on his luck, and he had been homeless for 10 years. And he was willing to go back home somewhere, just didn't know where to reach out for resources, and he didn't have any resources.
So now there was a measure that was passed a couple of years ago. It had a lot of controversy behind it to jump into that direction to provide plane tickets. So yes, you know, given the story of the gentleman you just talked about, has that program been as fallacious as made out by the media, it being able to bring people home, or does it have some value in situations like this gentleman's case, where you could reunite them with family or other in the mainland and then get them away back to where they're from?
Yeah, and I distinctly remember back in 2003 with former Governor Lingo. She came to our community because it had reached such a level. And there was 300 individuals that attended that public meeting to talk about what had grown as a blue tent city along our beach parks. There was an individual that came up to the microphone, a young woman, and had 2 children, and she was like, please, if somebody could just give me a ticket, I want to go back home. Now, as a state, we can't really do that.
Yeah.
Because we don't have resources or dollars to do that, or maybe the statute to do that. So we would have to reach out to nonprofit agencies or a private donor. But if you have individuals that like go back, you want to make sure they have the support network there. You want to make you reach out. Do you have connections on the other side? Are you going to have housing on the other side? Are you going to be able to make it when you get there?
Yeah.
So that young woman did have a private benefactor come forward and said, hey, I'll be willing to pay for their airfare as long as this was on the other side. And she was connected with that private individual through a nonprofit organization. The state kind of backed away and said, that's your kuleana now. And she was able to go back home. So when this resurfaced a couple years ago, like you're talking about, now I'm here in the legislature and I'm like, whoa, we shouldn't be doing this on a governmental level because that's kind of encouraging individuals. Well, I can get a free ticket over there and that government can graciously send me back. So we don't want to get into that business. And we don't want to even get into the business of contracting nonprofits to do that. So there are some organizations out there that still provide that service, and it's kind of like a one-on-one. You would kind of go talk to those individuals over there and they'll help you from now on. So there are sources that are doing that, but again, we encourage them to make sure they have that support network on the other end wherever they're going to go.
Well, yeah, you want to have the support network there, but also, you know, as far as government getting involved and giving plane tickets back, I mean, the system of abuse plus liability.
That's right.
That's the big one. You land on the other side, it's freezing cold, they freeze to death, and the family finds out, and they sue the state of Hawaii in the deep pockets. And so, while well-intended, and actually brings up an important point, you know, a lot of things that have been floated have the best of intent behind them, but have fallen very short in real applicability. Yesterday was the first meeting of the Hawaii Interagency Council on Homelessness. Do you think this new ecosystem approach of having all of the nonprofits, directors and stuff come together is going to finally create a mechanism to see real, I guess, being able to really address this issue?
Yes. So I've been on the Interagency Council because that was a passion of mine when I came in. 2011, I was kind of just sitting on as everybody gathering at the table. And then we created that statute in probably 2012 to make it in law, pa'a, who's supposed to be sitting at the table, and now you have responsibilities and you better be there. We went through one homeless czar. Then we didn't have one for a little bit. At the same time, we were coming up with what is our mission and how are we going to lay this out. That took us about 1.5 years, 2 years to come up with our template. Then we got the new homeless czar, which is Colin Kippen.
Okay, he's made the new homeless czar?
He's been there for about, I was trying to think yesterday, maybe almost 2 years now. Great, awesome man, man. He's got a great background, a lot of compassion.
Yes, definitely.
He can talk with the different agencies, he can talk with the businesses, he can talk with the nonprofits. You know, and just to get somebody to jump in the pool and start, okay, let's bring all these little duckies together. Now we all start talking and who has what to bring to the table. He's done a fantastic job. And now getting the different departments to buy in.
Yes.
You know, and what is their level and what is their kuleana in all these missions? Because you just can't say, okay, human services, it's all your problem because it's a human issue. We have to say we got mental health.
Yes.
That would be the Department of Health.
Department of Health, correct.
Okay?
And possibly public safety, too.
Public safety, because we got some individuals, they're breaking some laws out there. They might cycle in through the system for 30 days. Got PSD in there, Public Safety Department, right? So we got to bring them to the table. So we have all this, and then we're like, well, wait a minute, where's our private sector? Because they should be out here helping us, too. If it's We got individuals with medical issues. People get staph infections out there. People have diabetes. People get cut. People get sick. The hospitals. Bring them to the table. Then we start looking at, well, who's providing their coordinated care for our mental health individuals or even our seriously ill individuals. Yesterday was the first meeting we've had in about 4 months, I think. We had a big, huge meeting back in February, and we've been taking it as steps. We had a huge kickoff late last year when we got the SAMHSA grant. The Department of Health went and applied for a SAMHSA grant to help with.
SAMHSA grant is a?
SAMHSA grant is a federal program that provides services, so that coordinated services. So if you have somebody that's, has some mental health issues, usually you have a counselor and a therapist and somebody making sure you're taking your meds and all those kind of things. Well, we didn't have that in the Interagency Council. We don't have those extended services outside of what we normally have in our departments. So this is something we needed to add in. So what better way to test it than to bring in a grant?
Yep.
Apply for this grant. We won this grant, and it's a 3-year grant for about $700,000, $800,000 to provide that wraparound services. Wraparound services. And everybody keeps talking, what is this housing first? What is housing first?
No, what is housing first?
What is housing first?
That's a very good idea.
Housing first is where you take an individual and you plunk them in a house, no matter what condition they're in. They got some mental health issues, they got an addiction issues, they got an alcohol issues. We put them in house. We house them first. Then we say, well, in order to make sure they're going to stay in those walls, whatever they may be, how do you keep them safe and sound? Well, there's services. You wrap around the services around them to make sure, did you go to the doctor? Got your medication? Did you eat today?
Now, does interaction with these, counselors and other outreach, people, is it part of like the agreement to be in the Housing First program, to have a house?
Yes, it will be.
Yes, very good.
Yeah. Housing First, they decided, wow, this is a big bite to take off. So they decided they will take our most vulnerable. So about 2 years ago, we did this 100,000 home campaign because they had this criteria of how do we get housing for 100,000 people across the United States. So we undertook that through some nonprofit organizations to come up with a data list. So we did outreach, in 24 hours to come up with these names, and then we had a checkoff. Do you have health issues? Did you have an addiction? Did you have, how long you've been on the street? So they took this schematics and said, the person with the highest points is the most vulnerable, the most neediest.
And they would get the first priority.
And they would get first priority. So if you kind of looked at the newspaper, I think early 2013, we housed a female. And she was the highest, most vulnerable person. They just recently did an update interview with her about a month ago. She's still in her Housing First. She's got her wraparound services, and she's being very successful in her life right now, where she might have only had a couple weeks to live, living in the condition she was out in the street back in January in 2013. So those are success rates. Now you'll have people say, well, Angus, you're telling me it's going to cost $40,000 a year to put that person in Housing First.
Yeah.
That's a lot of tax money.
I'm sure there's a lot of people who've been saying that too.
Yeah, so $40,000 would equate to about $12,000 to $15,000 in the rent. Then the rest is wraparound services. And you say, that's a lot of money. Well, if you take that same individual, and we call them our frequent flyers. Okay. I know you're thinking airplanes, but no. Frequent flyers means if they're the most vulnerable health-wise, addiction-wise, mental-wise, where are they flying to? My emergency rooms.
Yes.
So one emergency room visit could be $1,000.
Oh, yes.
Over the last 3 years, we've been collecting all this data and bringing it together as we've been meeting. There was one individual identified as 150 visits to an emergency room in 1 year.
See, and this is something we do all pay for. It exacerbates the healthcare system. The cost of healthcare goes up all over the board.
Yeah.
The reimbursements for those emergency visits is non-existent. And now, when our insurance rates start to slide upward because of the cost of healthcare, this is one of the biggest drivers, right?
So when you take that individual that went to that that private hospital 150 times a $1,000 shot, that's $150,000.
Yeah.
And he was a Medicaid patient, so that's exactly what you're talking about. Medicaid's federal dollars that come down into our states that we pay for. It's a block grant. We got to stretch those dollars as thin as we can for all our Medicaid individuals. That could be my healthy child on a free lunch program gets Medicaid. My 61-year-old that's disabled could be on Medicaid. So my homeless individual that has a mental health issue that visited that hospital 150 times, he's on Medicaid. So
It's
that
dollars
child
taken away from the child.
That's right. It's dollars taken away from the rest of that pool that we've only got one block of money. So when I take you back to Homeless First, is it smart to spend $40,000 and to keep that gentleman in Housing First and put some wraparound services around him to make sure he's doing okay and he's out of the elements? Or is it smart for me to spend my $150,000 in Medicaid dollars to let him keep cycling as a frequent flyer through my emergency room?
Well, that's what exactly that San Francisco went through when they
Correct.
kind of created this model too of we're going to be disruptive instead of how do we take care of homelessness by keeping them, why don't we house them?
Yes.
We house them, and then of course in that area, the city people were like saying, oh my gosh, you know, it's costing $40,000, $50,000, $60,000, but then the people who were doing the program said, hey, non-stop extended services, not to mention all these other things, you're paying way more.
So now if we don't have them frequent flying into my hospitals for emergency visits, what if they're frequent flying into my public safety, into my jail system, into my court system? Just think of how much the cost
into your
that
parks.
is. That's right. When really they normally wouldn't be there, but because they might not have been in the right state of mind and they upset somebody or hit somebody because they're living on the street, they end up in our jail system.
Yes.
And that's costing us dollars a day too. So how do we balance this? When we start actually laying out the numbers to people, then they're going to go, okay, well maybe we should house. And we're not talking a lot of people. We're not. There's not like 100,000 people that are going to be my Housing First people. There's not. We might have 200 to 300 most vulnerable people. Those are the people that we're still trying to identify. As we identify them, we identify do they qualify for certain services. They might be a veteran, so then they can fall under certain veteran services, which is a high priority under our current federal administration. Help our vets, right? So we might be able to, I don't want to say push them off over there, but we found the correct stream that they should be in.
Yes.
You know, if they're not a veteran, you know, do they qualify under Medicaid if they're over 65 years old? You know, then you start looking at, well, do they have other sources? Do they have a private insurance? I mean, that's when we start, once we get them settled down a little bit and we find out their financials. If they do, they don't. We find out their most needs. And then Housing First could mean 12 months. It can mean for the rest of their life. But we got to get them stable a little bit first and then find out what stream do we put them in.
So on the Housing First, are you looking at traditional like apartment buildings, pre-existing buildings,
Correct.
building new buildings, or in some of the areas, like in other areas, what they're looking at is, they call them, you know, tents or mobile homes, or not mobile homes, better, like yurts actually is what the name of them. They're just
Yurts,
these really light prefab, easy to build, to find state or city properties. What direction are you guys looking at as far as the actual housing goes?
So currently, you know, and this was something that came up in yesterday's hearing or discussion at our committee. Where are we going to get this housing from? You know, we don't got a lot of public housing.
Yeah.
So we've gotten some commitment from our public housing to say, okay, we'll give you no more than 5 or 10 units. You know, we go out and we knock doors with private owners. If you're willing to sign up with this program, can we have a contract with your unit for 12 months? And we've got people buying in on that with private, you know, because we have philanthropists that really believe in this, and they say they got to have their structure around them, or else, you know, you got to give up the unit. And we've also looking at the path of how do we start creating or buying units. And that's going to take a longer trail to get to.
Exactly.
We don't have that right now. So we only have an inventory of a few places, and some will be public and some will be private. And again, we have to still provide those services around them and make sure we've got it all locked and loaded for these individuals. Because again, this is a fragile individual that we're going to take that responsibility on for, and we don't want them cycling out, because as we've seen, and definitely after what I've seen over the last 14 years, was there's individuals that have been cycling through the system. So if I tap you on a beach park and say, we're going to put you in an emergency shelter such as IHS. Down in my area, we've got Pa'iolo Kaia'ulu. Those are emergency. You can only stay there up to 6 months, under their conditions. If you get situated, you can transition into transitional housing. That could be up to 2 years you can stay in transitional housing. And while you're in these projects, hopefully you get better life skills, you get a better job, you get more stable. And once you get out of your transitional housing, the hope and pray is you get into permanent housing. But what we've been finding is people have been taking these paths, and sometimes it takes up to 3 years in that path. We're finding that you get them into permanent housing and they fail. And they fail because maybe they didn't know how to budget. Maybe they lost their job and they're going back into that cycle. Maybe there was an addiction issue that they fell back down into. So we're seeing that this path that has been created over these years isn't great. It's not working for the most. So that's how do we start tweaking that? How do we start changing that? How do we probably look at maybe when they get into permanent housing, provide support networks out there to make sure they continue on their path of success.
Homelessness, the challenge of our society, and breaking the cycle. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with Representative Joe Jordan to discuss this compelling issue and the solutions which may be at hand to finally allow us to face our future with homelessness. We'll be right back.
I'm Jay Fidel. That's Sharon Moriwaki of the Hawaii Energy Policy Forum. And every Wednesday we have Hawaii, the State of Clean Energy. We've been doing it for some time now, and we have some fantastic guests on there, unbelievable guests who give us insight into what is going on in a very complex, sometimes very confusing, sometimes very disappointing area of progress in the state. So we love doing this. We love meeting them. We love talking to them. We love having their ideas out on the table. So maybe, just maybe, we can all make some sense of what's going on. Sharon, what do you think?
I think it's absolutely correct. We enjoy ourselves meeting with all these people and hearing about the energy and the state of clean energy, and hopefully we advance clean energy for the state. So it's terrific. Join us.
Okay, it's every Wednesday. Okay, Wednesday is Energy Day. Every Wednesday, 4 to 5 p.m. Hawaii, the State of Clean Energy, here on ThinkTech Hawaii. We'll see you there.
Aloha, everybody. Welcome back to Facing Our Future. I'm your host, Angus McKelvey. And today we're joined with Representative Joe Jordan, and we are talking about homelessness, a situation that has become more than just a community issue, a table discussion. It is now a societal issue, one that has ramifications in many areas. But when we left to go to break here, we were talking about cycles, breaking cycles,
yes.
Identifying cycles, and the Interagency Council also has an ecosystem approach, which
Correct.
I mean, so many times you would see the finger pointing going on. For instance, people would call on the state level, Department of Health, hey, we have a homeless person, call the counties.
Yeah.
Let the police deal with it. Or the police would be like, this is a, human service issue. And they would be, so it looks like this council is finally bringing together everybody regardless of stratification, but you're also starting to tear these silos down in the process.
Yeah.
And having a czar like Colin especially is critical, because when they've looked at, these silo tearing, stakeholder ecosystem building types of things before, if you don't have somebody driving it, somebody with the vision so Colin has really stepped in and starting to do that process, and you're getting the buy-in now from the different entities.
Correct. So Colin has gone out and malamed everybody, and got other people who never sat at the table come sit at the table, and what can you bring, what you can bring, what data are you going to bring here. So we started realizing there was a lot of silos out there.
Yes.
A lot of silos in our state government, in our city and state, not really talking about it. We got a lot of agencies, nonprofit agencies, in their little silo, because these are our clients, those are your clients. We don't want to ingroming, but at some point in time they may filter through all of that.
Exactly. Yeah.
And how do you take the approach of looking at the individual and making sure they can stream through all that and still be successful at the end? And we started seeing all this, and And we've created these projects through the Interagency Council to start keeping data. You know, some data might be on our most vulnerable individuals. Some data might be on what projects are working and not working. That's why we're doing some pilots with a few things to see if they're going to work. And we're listening to the community. We're listening to the community with micro units, meaning small little compact units to live in. We're listening to the community on better mental health services. I mean, just yesterday, I was talking to one of the other council members, and he was telling me the story about this individual that has a mental health issue and has been at the Honolulu Holiday for almost 2 weeks, every day. I want to come in and talk to so-and-so. I want to come in and talk to so-and-so. And by they calm him down, and they like, well, what do you want to talk about? And then, well, my counselor doesn't want to talk to me. My counselor doesn't want to talk to me. And we know how important it is that you should be checking in with your counselor, sometimes on a daily basis, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. And they were like, okay, and this is how far they've taken the compassion with this, to say, okay, what's their number? Let us call them. Do you know it took one of those city agencies 2 weeks to finally get a hold of this gentleman's counselor with this mental health issue? And by the time they get a hold of that counselor, the counselor says, well, I've been trying to get a hold of you for 3 weeks too. And I mean, you're talking to an agency going, my God, we were calling for him. So where's that disconnect for that gentleman?
Yes.
If we can keep him, you know, stable, then he'd been okay. And I was glad that he was at, you know, the city and asking for the service and knowing about, we're talking about homelessness and stuff, and he was a homeless individual. So we now recognize that. Now it's like, well, how do we start? And then we find out that before they used to get services of almost 3 hours a week for counseling. I was told yesterday that some individuals only get a half an hour of counseling once a week now. I mean, that's a huge difference for somebody that really needs that counseling. So these are some of the silos that we're looking at and saying, you know, how do we provide better
And
resources?
that actually brings up a very good point, because, you know, you have an area where if you're trying to spread counseling out to everybody and you're only having now half an hour, when in reality, there may be people who really need it. They need the 3 hours, and there are those who probably don't need it at all.
That's right.
But if you're continuing to be proprietary about it, saying, we got to give everybody counseling no matter what, then you create a resource problem too. And hasn't that been one of the challenges as well?
That has been one of the challenges, you know, because everything has gone by, we're going to give you these dollars as long as you told me how many touches you're going to make. So if you try to make so many touches, what are you going to do? You're going to take that time from 3 hours down to 2 hours, down to 1, down to 15 minutes, touch. Well, I touched this many individuals for this amount of money. But that wasn't really productive for those individuals.
It's almost like the money was might as well not even been spent at that point.
So that's why some of these agencies, meaning the state agencies, now are retooling some of these requests for proposals on some of the dollars that we put out into these nonprofits to say, here's your new schematics that you must meet in order for us to make this homelessness succeed in stopping it in 2016 or 2018, wherever our targets are going to be for certain different individuals. We've also started saying we need to start collecting data on what is success
Very
and what
big
is
point,
not,
yes.
you know, and keeping that. So basically we're retooling the crisis response system for the most vulnerable. Now we have people that will fall into homelessness because of a job or because, you know, I left my spouse and I need something and I don't have a contact or something. So that would be called rapid rehousing. We want to make sure we grab those people as fast as we can and put them somewhere in housing so they don't become a permanent homeless individual out there. So you've got different types of homelessness out there.
So besides looking at the cycles, you know, the stages of homelessness to a person, you're also starting to use data, you know, and outreach to stratify.
Correct.
You know, you have, like, for instance, the working homeless, so rapid housing would be perfect for them. However, with somebody with mental illness or other conditions, rapid housing would not be the best
That's
assessment
right. You would
away.
do a housing first model for those individuals, and those individuals would need more wraparound services, where if I would need a rapid housing for somebody that might have just lost their job or they're leaving a spouse because of some issue, domestic or whatever it is, rapid rehousing, and they might not need all wraparound services. What do you need for a housing voucher? What do you need for you know, job, or what do you need for transportation? That's a different type of service we're going to provide for them. And then with both these tracks, we're also going to have to say, how do we continue to help with services once they've gotten settled wherever they're at and make sure they're successful? So this isn't like, okay, we put them in a house and we walk away.
Yeah.
Because we know, we've seen over the last 15 years that ain't working.
Yes,
They fall back into that cycle. And we also need to break the cycle that if you're a child and you're homeless as a child, then probably 80% of the time you're gonna be homeless as an adult.
That's a very interesting statistic.
So
right
we
there.
need to break the cycle and not have that next generation be homeless. And that's a proven fact. I learned that back in 2004. And I was like, my goodness.
The many of the kids, the keiki you saw on the beach
Correct.
right there are now potentially many of them could be homeless.
Could be homeless. And then we have our other pockets, which, you know, our other agencies are working on, such as our foster youth. When they age out of the system, they were becoming homeless on the street by the time they were 18 or 19 because we're done. We fostered you as long as we can. The government doesn't help us anymore. Go. So, you know, thanks to you and our legislature, this last session, we provided some support network for those individuals in foster program with our state, that they will remain in our foster program and we will help provide housing vouchers for those children aging out, such as 19, 20, all the way to 21, as long as they're in a trade program or going to school, and they have support network around them. So we're looking at all these different pockets. So foster youth that would have ended up on the streets, now we're going to make sure they have housing up until 21 with some support networks. We're looking at our mental health issues. We're looking at our health issues. We're looking at our rapid rehousing for somebody that's going to be out on the street. And when people start looking at it, they're like, well, we only have like maybe 3,000 homeless. Well, technically, we have closer to maybe 7,000 because homelessness means you don't have a place of your own. So as we all know, we have Ohana housing here, right? So you might have grandma and grandpa there and their children and their grandchildren there. So technically, and you don't want to use that term for them, but they're homeless.
Yeah.
Because they don't have a home of their own.
Exactly.
So when you start adding all those other numbers, and then we got a situation, they're all going to say, it's your fault because we don't have affordable housing here. Not necessarily. I mean, that is a true factor.
Do you think that it's like a panacea response? You know, well, we need affordable housing. We have homelessness because there's no affordable housing. I mean, do you think that, especially given now the smart way that this problem is being addressed to the council and other, you know, creating the cycles, you know, stratifying the different levels of homelessness, affordable housing, do you hear people in the public still coming and saying, oh, we just need more affordable housing, the problem would be gone?
Yeah, there was 2 individuals at our committee yesterday saying, well, you don't have enough affordable housing or affordable rentals out there. Well, I just told you earlier, it's going to take us 10, 15 years to build affordable housing or affordable
and that
rentals.
one size fits all may not work. You have somebody with mental illness conditions or substance abuse conditions. You may have affordable housing, but that's not going to keep them from cycling back out to the streets again.
That's correct, right? So my mental health guy or my addiction problem person, we can have all the affordable housing in the world. If they don't even know what planet they're on right now, or if they're laying on a street or a bed, all the affordable housing in the world doesn't solve that problem.
And there's also conditions on many affordable housing. And so you have situations, do you, in the data that's being collected, has there been any numbers coming in about how many are what they call, were in public housing but displaced from public housing because of conditions or rules that are associated there, that they force their eviction? Or?
That's something we should be gathering. But you see, you know, when this started in 2011, this Homeless Interagency Council, you know, we had a few directors that just was like kicking and screaming, why am I going to go there? That's not part of my, you know, job description, you know, and then we created that statute where you must come as directors or send a representative, right? Well, we still have a few of them that are kicking and screaming. And unfortunately, one of those kicking and screaming would be the person that would bring that data. So they had a representative in the meeting yesterday, which I was quite pleased to see. So I will probably be circling around to them and going, can we please just have the data? I know you don't think it's your kuleana to be here, but, and that's what it is. We still break in on the silos in between our agencies too. And it's all resources, right?
Exactly. Big data, collection thereof, is this a way for us to get the information we need to finally solve the homelessness problem and to break down the silos of the agencies and those responsible for this issue. We'll be right back after this messages.
Hello, I'm Martin Despang, and I'm the host together with the one and only Ali Amashta, and our show is called Urban Transcendence. And Urban Transcendence is about identifying where we have a unique situation of a vibrant city in one of the most beautiful natural environments. So how these two can coincide, sometimes conflict, how they could find reciprocity in the 21st century is what we're excited about. And we're planning on bringing in a diverse body of guests, both from the arts and the science and the established and the wise and the emerging generation. So hope you will join us. We'll always be on Thursdays from 1 to 2 p.m. Thank you.
Aloha, everybody. Welcome back to Facing Our Future. I'm your host, Angus McKelvey, and we're joined by Representative Joe Jordan today from the Waianae Coast, and we are talking homelessness, a problem and an issue that faces us all, especially in today's society. When we took a break, we've been talking about, it's something that is a theme on this show, big data, using data to try to get better analytics to solve issues and problems and allocate resources. What is, you had, when we left, you talked about the data collection person, kicking and screaming, finally got him in there.
Yeah, we finally, and sometimes it takes, so you'll say, wow, it took that guy to get, from 2011 to 2014, but sometimes it takes a while to get people to break old habits or think I'm not part of that solution, so why do I need to participate? Well, I think we've proven that by collecting all this data, starting to break down some of the smaller silos, and then proving from those small data collections that, oh, somebody might be right about this. So we're still dragging in some of those stats and numbers. We're chipping a little bit at a time to some of these. We look at some administrative rules. I mean, they're ancient. They could be 25, 30 years old now, and they don't even meet what today's needs are. So we got to start looking at some of that. We got to start looking at how much inventory we have, what kind of inventory we have, and start looking at this data going, well, maybe we're not, servicing these individuals that are now our new schematics with the data, with the
yes, you have to
places we
retool
have.
the data collection.
That is correct.
To the new schematics being created through this new paradigm. Your data collection points are traditionally, nonprofits, the touch entities, right?
Yeah.
Do you look at, or is the council starting to discuss more non-traditional expansive data point collections, like for instance, schools, where teachers, okay, good.
Yeah, so we're starting to look at more data from different aspects. And that would be our mental health guys. That would be how many times they might have cycled out of the program. Why do we have such waiting lists for certain programs? I mean, that's what we're looking at, and then trying to dig down those root sources and go, well, hey, maybe they would fit better in this stream, or maybe we need to tool some of these rules. So if you look at, public-private partnerships of building low-income and affordable housing, we usually say, we'll provide the dollars, you keep it in low-income affordable for 60 years, and the guy who manages the building, they put their own rules on there.
Yeah.
So they'll say, well, you can't come in here if you've had an arrest in your whole lifetime. Now, come on.
No, pretty much.
I might have a homeless guy out there that now is on the straight and narrow, now got a wife and a couple kids, and they can't get into, this housing project because it's run by a private entity and because they got their rules. It's like a condominium association.
Yeah.
Don't smoke in my building, or don't bring your pets, or whatever it is. So they're saying, well, because we run this program, if you've been arrested ever in your life, you can't be a tenant
with the
here.
homeless population, I mean, you're pretty much talking about almost all of them, especially when you have the misdemeanor charges that are levied.
That's correct.
Pandering or blocking, obstruction, things like
so
that.
I had come across that with one of the private buildings that were built in my community for low and affordable. So we called the managing agency and we said, this young lady with her boyfriend and the children, they'd like to move in there, and his conviction was more than 5 years old. He's been good. Can't you cut somebody some slack? So they actually looked at it and revised their rules to say, well, if you haven't had an arrest in the last 5 years, then you can apply to be a tenant here. So that's how we're going to start breaking down those little barriers. And I think the next steps would be, maybe we should look at some more conditioning on the dollars that they get from federal, state, or city to build these projects, to say, let's be cautious on some of these conditions you put on as a private builder.
Yes,
yeah.
That's important. And the collection of the data, and the RFPs, you're already starting to retool the request for proposals, RFPs as they're called. now as the data comes in and more is revealed through analytics, it's safe to say that this is an organic approach, that this is changing.
It is.
That's,
Because along with that, now we're going to start looking at, well, maybe we shouldn't have been throwing money to this. Maybe we should start saying, well, you get half of those dollars and the other half of the dollars need to go over here for wraparound services.
Yes.
Or some of it need to be more gathering. And these guys are going to scream over here saying, well, you're cutting our dollars, but you're not producing the results you need over here.
and results that you can verify, results that you can actually track back and say, because right now it seems that when you hear results, they go in the stage of the anecdotal.
Yeah.
Not into the stage of, okay, this is why we can come to this conclusion, because this data shows that this is working, this is happening. Yeah. The cycling and breaking, into these different stages of homelessness, not just putting a broad brush stroke over all the homeless population.
Yeah, so
when you have limited dollars, you have limited federal reimbursements coming down, it almost behooves us as a society, if we are going to get serious about this and actually make a real change, to be doing
and make a headway.
A headway.
A headway.
You can feel the frustration when you go out there. You can feel the frustration because, first of all, the silo mentality and the finger pointing is very frustrating for the community, and it is a community, but also because they see it discussed over and over, and yet they don't see. Now it sounds like, and I'm so glad to have you on the show to talk about this, that there is taking a scientific, analytical, inclusive approach, ecosystem approach, and we might actually be able to chip away at this.
Yeah, and then we also got to break down those silos with. Somebody was talking to me last night I was at a neighborhood board meeting. They're saying, well, the state puts up all the money for homelessness, and the city hasn't put a dime towards this. Well, they admitted that in yesterday's committee meeting. It's true, in the past, the city has put no dollars towards homelessness. Well, they probably said, well, that's your Kuleana state, but where are they lying? And who's enforcing it?
In the
That's
park,
us,
it's a county park.
Right? City with HPD and everything else, right? So, it's taken us this time to get the city to come on board. City, the state, we put up $1.5 million into Housing First.
Yep.
This is our third go around with this. So now you saw the city come in saying, okay, well, we'll put $3 million towards the Housing First initiative and their services, right? And shore up their agencies over there. So they finally, and it took time, right? It took time to get the individuals over there to buy in, to pass that legislation in their budget. So now, now we got two different government agencies now working hand in hand with a common theme. And then they have all the enforcement power over there. These parks are usually city and county parks. Those streets are normally, Waikiki is city and county of Honolulu. So they need to put more resources towards what is costing them money too. The city also put, don't hold me to this, I think it was like $42 million in CIP, capital improvement dollars, towards housing and that type of thing. But that's not current dollars, as we know. Our current dollars is in the operating budget, $3 million bucks. Let's start working on this. So breaking down those silos between the two governing agencies. But that's only city and county of Honolulu. So people, neighbor island,
Got
like
our
you,
own counties, yes.
You're going to say, Joe, man, it's an Oahu-centric thing.
No,
what you
it
doing?
is not.
No,
it is not. But the thing that you bring up, besides getting them to work together, and it is more impactful in neighbor islands where you have the counties really on the front line of everything, you want to avoid the duplication of services that adds to the confusion among the population.
That's right.
If you go to the city and county and you get services, but then go to the state and are getting the same services, you're duplicating efforts and you're creating confusion.
And we don't want to do that. So, each island's going to be unique to itself with their own counties. I was on Kauai on Monday with HHSC, our Hawaii hospital system.
Corporation.
So then yesterday in our interagency council meeting, we had HPH, the Hawaii Pacific Health System, which is AKA Palimomi, Straub, Kapiolani. Well, they signed a memorandum of agreement with our interagency council to say, because luckily for us, they are very forward thinking as a hospital system to look at what's costing the most, what's not costing the most, are we providing better care or not sufficient care? And they started recognizing the frequent flyers. So they've been providing us data
On the frequent flyer.
on the frequent flyers.
That's huge.
Through our emergency rooms, through a private hospital. Data to our agency. And that's why we started identifying, wait a minute, we need to look at this. Wait a minute, when they get discharged, where do they get discharged to? Back to the street?
Touch the street.
We can't do that.
Exactly,
Under
yeah.
ACA, we can no longer do that. We have to have a discharge plan, correct?
Yes, that is
so
correct.
again, now we're bringing back the health back in there.
Yes.
So when I was sitting there, and we finally, we signed this gracious memorandum of agreement between us and a private hospital. We're now going to go talk to Queens and focus on maybe Queens West because the original emergency proclamation started on the Waianae Coast, and we've had issues from Eva Beach, Howell Bush, all the way to the Kaena Point. So since that hospital captivates a lot of that populace out there, we might say, hey, can we do an MOU with you to provide some data?
Yes.
And we can work with you. When I was on Kauai, I went, wait a minute, brainstorm.
Yeah.
Technically, we've got Wilcox, which is HPH.
HPH, yep.
And then we've got the rest of the hospital system on Kauai as our HHSC,
Yeah.
Hawaii State Hospital System, right? Hey, let's start asking our state hospital system to start working in coordination with us regarding our frequent flyers.
Exactly, because you want to be to make sure the data doesn't mislead.
That's correct.
It needs to be conclusive as possible, or inclusive as possible. Pardon. And in this, you would, to have only HPH collecting frequent flyers when they could be doing frequent flyers at state hospital systems defeats.
That's right.
Doesn't it?
So that would be a county to itself, Kauai County, and we know they got limited resources with less than 70,000 occupants on the island, right? So if we start saying, well, how can we help start providing your data? And then we go to Maui, which has a larger hospital system, one of the larger ones under HHSC, and start saying, how can we start doing resources with your islands? We're going to go to Hawaii Island and start looking at how can we work with these resources over there. So we also bring in our mental health projects, which is our different kauhales, our friendship clubs. We can start looking at smaller islands like Lanai or Molokai with our federally qualified health centers.
Yep, the health centers are critical.
That's right. So it's already there.
Yep, we just
you
need to make it part of the process. Like you said, the
That's
request
right.
for proposals need to have ingrained in them data collection as part of the, winning this contract of services, because it's going to provide actual strong data. If you can show that because of frequent flyers into a hospital like, for instance, a Wilcox, that over $500,000 minimum, if not, was spent on this, and if you had an outreach person stationed at the emergency room for $60,000 a year, all of a sudden you're now able to really balance dollars against dollars.
You got it. So I mean, that's when we start looking at it. You got to take this 30,000, 40,000 view of this, not be all these little silos and stuck down in the muds and the weeds.
In the weeds, that's the best thing.
And so this is how we, and then the hospitals might even think we're not even part of that, but in reality, that affects their corporate dollar and keeping their doors open.
Yes.
That affects maybe our Medicaid because they knock on our door to pay for that individual that didn't have health care.
Losing money to being penalties.
That's correct. So they might be facing penalties. So how do we all come together on this specific type of situation to resolve a crisis we all have?
Yes.
And again, at the end of the day, not every homeless individual has a mental health or a substance addiction that causes that crisis. This is just one SWAT where we can gather the most costliest individuals.
Yes.
The other SWAT would be, how do we shore up groups that touch the very vulnerable and low-income families? Is that through a reading program? Is that through an outreach program that they might come to? Is that through Honolulu Community Action Programs? Now we need to start getting those guys into the mix and start saying, what kind of data can you bring together so we can identify individuals that might fit these criteria so we can just shore them up a little bit, make sure they're successful and they're on their way, or what kind of help that we might need. And that's what we're also looking at. This Hale o Malama is kind of like this new phase that's coming out of the Interagency Council. It's going to collect this data. And again, everybody's like, you going to collect my information? No,
because that's
all the information will still be protected and private.
And I think people need to know that it's the collection of anonymous data
That's
that is the
correct.
value.
We're
Individualized
actually
data
numbers
ruins
and
yes.
stats. We're not collecting Johnny and Susie with Mary and Peter. No. Or this one has a chronic illness, or this one has a. No. We're not identifying individuals in that. Yeah.
Definitely. Well, you know what, Joe? Thank you so much for
Oh, yeah.
coming and talking story with us. But you know, it's very heartening to have this discussion because now it appears that besides the silos coming down, government and private entities are using data and analytics to help to present to both decision makers for resources the true picture
Yes.
and to stop the duplication. We might actually be able to get a headway on this, right?
No, I think we're all moving into that 22nd century.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for coming on our show. Really appreciate it.
Yes.
We'll be definitely talking more and hope to have you again in the future as
Oh, yeah.
we address this and the other issues in our society. Once again, I'm
Yeah.
Angus McKelvey, your host, and this is Facing Our Future. And join us next Wednesday when we have another subject about our future and how we can rise to the challenge and create a better society for all of us. Have a great week and a happy 4th of July. Aloha.